My name is David Miller. I am 48 years old, and the day I asked for a raise, my wife laughed at me in front of the entire board. Not a polite smile, not an awkward reaction. She threw her head back and laughed, loud enough to fill the room, loud enough to make sure everyone understood their place and mine. We were seated around a long conference table in our New York headquarters, glass walls, city in the background, and years of my work reduced to a punchline. She was the CEO. I was her husband. And in that moment, I was nothing more than entertainment. I didn't ask for anything unreasonable. I laid out numbers, performance metrics, deals I had personally structured and defended. I spoke calmly, professionally. I reminded them that my role as corporate legal strategist had saved the company millions in risk exposure. She didn't let me finish. She laughed and said, "You're already compensated in ways most people here will never be." The room went quiet. No one defended me. No one looked at me. They stared at the table, at their screens, anywhere but my face. That silence told me everything. I felt the heat in my neck, the kind that comes from humiliation, not anger. I didn't react. I didn't argue. I didn't justify myself. I simply nodded and sat back. Years of negotiating hostile takeovers had trained me for moments like this. When someone believes they have total control, they stop hiding their intentions. Her laughter wasn't confidence. It was carelessness. She went on, explaining how loyalty should not be confused with entitlement. She framed it as leadership, as discipline. She talked about vision and sacrifice while sitting in a position she had reached faster because of the groundwork I had laid long before she ever stepped into that role. Our personal relationship had been carefully erased from the conversation, except when it served to diminish me. She wanted the board to see me as dependent, not essential. When the meeting ended, people stood quickly. Chairs scraped the floor. Conversations resumed as if nothing had happened. One board member patted my shoulder without meeting my eyes. Another avoided me completely. My wife gathered her documents and walked past me as if we were strangers. She didn't say a word. That walk told me more than the laughter. It told me she believed I would stay silent. At home that night, she acted as if the meeting had gone well. She poured herself a drink and said the board appreciated strong leadership. She told me I should be grateful for stability. I listened. I watched how relaxed she was, how certain. She believed she had put me back in my place. What she didn't understand was that I had stopped playing the role she assigned me a long time ago. I am not just a corporate attorney. I specialize in mergers and acquisitions at a level where information is currency and timing is leverage. I know where weaknesses hide. I know how numbers can be shaped to tell the wrong story. And I had been watching her decisions closely for months. Aggressive expansions, quiet adjustments, pressure placed on teams to move faster than compliance allowed. I had raised concerns privately. She dismissed them. Publicly, she laughed. That night, after she went to sleep, I opened my laptop. I didn't do it out of revenge. I did it out of necessity. I reviewed emails, approvals, timelines. I cross-checked filings with internal reports. Patterns emerged quickly. Decisions pushed through without full disclosure. Risk shifted, not eliminated. I realized something uncomfortable. She wasn't just reckless. She was exposed. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere at work changed. I was excluded from meetings I had always attended. Information reached me late. My responsibilities were quietly reduced. It was subtle but intentional. Isolation is a strategy. I had used it myself in negotiations. She was trying to corner me into irrelevance. What she didn't see was that isolation also gives you clarity. I started documenting everything. Not emotionally, methodically. I kept copies, timestamps, confirmations. I spoke less and listened more. I let her believe the laughter had worked. Meanwhile, I researched competitors. One name stood out immediately. Her biggest rival. A firm she openly dismissed but privately feared. A company known for patience, not noise. For precision, not spectacle. I knew people there. I had crossed paths with their legal team years earlier. Respect had been mutual. Trust had never been broken. I didn't reach out right away. Timing mattered. I waited until I was certain. Certain that staying would cost me more than leaving. Certain that silence was no longer protection. The final confirmation came during another board meeting. She presented projections I knew were incomplete. I watched board members nod, trusting her confidence. I said nothing. I already understood the game had shifted. When the meeting ended, she smiled at me. Not warmly, victorious. She believed the story was over. It wasn't. It was just beginning. After that meeting, I stopped pretending the situation could be corrected from the inside. That illusion was gone. What remained was assessment. I needed to understand exactly where I stood, not as a husband, not as an employee, but as a variable she believed she had already neutralized. I am David Miller, and I have spent over 20 years watching people underestimate risks they thought they controlled. The pattern was familiar. Confidence turns into exposure when no one is allowed to challenge it. At home, the distance between us grew sharper. Conversations became transactional. She spoke about the company as if it were hers alone, never ours, never something we had built in parallel. She reminded me casually that my position existed because she allowed it. She framed it as honesty. I heard it as warning. Power, when spoken out loud, is usually insecurity looking for reinforcement. I began reconstructing the timeline of her rise, not emotionally, but structurally. Promotions aligned with specific deals. Those deals aligned with aggressive assumptions. Those assumptions aligned with legal shortcuts that had never been properly stress-tested. She relied on speed and intimidation. People around her complied because she rewarded loyalty and punished hesitation. I had been the buffer for years, the one who cleaned language, delayed filings, softened exposure. Once she started sidelining me, that buffer disappeared. I reached out quietly to former colleagues, people who had left under vague circumstances. I didn't accuse. I asked questions. Patterns repeated. Pressure to approve. Pressure to stay quiet. Pressure framed as ambition. None of it illegal on its own. Together, it formed something fragile, a structure that could not survive scrutiny. At work, my isolation became official. I was reassigned to advisory tasks with no authority. Invitations stopped arriving. Decisions were announced, not discussed. The board followed her lead. They saw performance, not risk. Results, not process. I understood them. Boards reward confidence until confidence costs them everything. That was when I made contact with her rival. I did not go in desperate. I went in prepared. I requested a private meeting with their general counsel, someone I had respected for years. We met off-site, neutral ground. No promises, no theatrics. I laid out my background, my role, my expertise. Then I stopped talking. Silence does more work than persuasion. When he asked why I was there, I told him the truth. I said I was considering a change, and that I possessed insight that could redefine market dynamics if handled responsibly. He didn't laugh. He asked careful questions. I answered precisely. I did not exaggerate, I did not speculate. I explained structures, decision flows, internal pressures. I showed him what I could without breaching anything yet. Enough to demonstrate credibility. Enough to prove that my wife's empire was built faster than it should have been. He listened. He took notes. He said very little. That told me everything. Over the next few weeks, discussions continued through formal channels. I was cautious. I respected boundaries. They respected mine. Unlike my wife, they did not rush. They verified. They cross-checked. They understood that real leverage is useless if it cannot survive daylight. I found that refreshing. At the same time, the pressure at home intensified. She questioned my loyalty openly. She suggested I was becoming obsolete. She reminded me of our age difference more than once, as if experience expired faster than ambition. I let her talk. Every word she used to diminish me became confirmation that she believed I was trapped. She never asked where I was going in the evenings. She assumed I was retreating. That assumption cost her. The offer came quietly. Not dramatic, not inflated. Authority, autonomy, and respect. They didn't need me to destroy her. They needed me to help them compete. That distinction mattered. I accepted on the condition that everything be done cleanly, with full legal separation and disclosure. They agreed without hesitation. That told me I had chosen correctly. When I submitted my resignation, the room froze. She stared at the letter as if it were a foreign language. She asked if this was a joke. I said no. She asked where I was going. I told her. For the first time since that boardroom laughter, her confidence cracked. Just slightly. Enough for me to see it. She tried to regain control immediately. She accused me of betrayal. She questioned my ethics. She warned me about consequences. I listened without reacting. I told her my decision was final and fully compliant. I reminded her that non-compete clauses cut both ways. She dismissed me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. What she didn't understand was that the strategy was already in motion. Information, when shared at the right time with the right people, does not need drama. It only needs accuracy. And accuracy was something I had in abundance. From that moment on, the balance shifted. She was no longer facing a subordinate. She was facing a mirror. And mirrors do not lie. The laugh that had echoed through the boardroom was still hanging in the air. She just hadn't realized yet how far that echo would travel. Once my resignation became public inside the company, the narrative shifted fast. People who had avoided me suddenly wanted clarity. Others stayed silent, afraid of choosing the wrong side too early. I watched it unfold with distance. I was no longer inside the structure, but I knew it well enough to predict how stress would travel through it. When a system is built around one voice, any challenge to that voice creates instability. At my new firm, the transition was methodical. No announcements, no provocation, just alignment. I began reviewing public filings, earnings calls, regulatory disclosures, not as an attacker, but as a strategist. I knew where assumptions had been stretched. I knew which numbers depended on silence rather than confirmation. Every aggressive expansion has a pressure point. I had helped design many of them. Now I could see hers clearly. She reacted exactly as expected. Within weeks, she announced bold initiatives, faster growth, louder messaging. She needed to project control. When leaders feel threatened, they overcorrect. That overcorrection creates exposure. Internally, teams were pushed harder. Externally, promises grew sharper. Analysts began asking questions. Nothing hostile yet, just curiosity. Curiosity is where trouble begins. I stayed quiet. My role was not public. My name did not appear in press releases. That was intentional. Influence works best when it is invisible. I advised my new leadership on timing, tone, and restraint. We did not challenge her claims directly. We let them stand. When someone builds on unstable ground, interruption only delays collapse. At home, the atmosphere turned cold. Conversations stopped altogether. Lawyers replaced dialogue. She accused me formally of attempting to undermine her. The accusation was weak, unsupported. It went nowhere, but it revealed panic. Calm people do not reach for accusations. They reach for solutions. The first real crack appeared during a quarterly review. Her projections missed expectations. Not dramatically, just enough. She blamed market conditions. Analysts accepted it but noted the shift. Small notes accumulate. Confidence erodes one footnote at a time. Behind the scenes, regulators began asking for clarification on disclosures. Routine questions, but poorly timed. Her team scrambled. Decisions that had once moved quickly now slowed under scrutiny. Internal disagreements surfaced. People began protecting themselves instead of the vision. That is when leadership fractures. I watched from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with precision. I had warned her. Not publicly, not emotionally, structurally. She had chosen speed over stability. Now stability was demanding repayment. The rival firm moved carefully. They positioned themselves as conservative, reliable, transparent. Everything she was not projecting anymore. Clients noticed. Boards noticed. Trust shifts quietly before it moves loudly. We did not steal clients. We attracted them by contrast. She reached out once. A brief message. Professional. Cold. She asked if I was involved. I replied truthfully. I said I was doing my job, nothing more, nothing less. That answer angered her more than denial would have, because it reminded her that this was not personal. It was structural. As pressure increased, mistakes followed. A rushed filing, an inconsistent statement, a correction that raised more questions than it resolved. Media picked it up, not aggressively, just enough. The board requested explanations. She pushed back. That resistance was documented. I knew then that the final phase had begun, not collapse. Exposure. Collapse is dramatic. Exposure is precise. Once exposed, collapse becomes inevitable. I was called to testify in an unrelated review months later. Routine. My statements were factual, measured, unemotional. I answered what was asked. No more, no less. Accuracy does not need emphasis. It stands on its own. When the board finally moved against her, it was swift. Not public at first. Committees formed, authority redistributed, her power narrowed. The laugh that had once silenced a room no longer carried weight. People stopped deferring. They started documenting. She was removed quietly, not disgraced, not celebrated, replaced. That is how organizations protect themselves. They do not avenge, they adjust. I never spoke to her again after that. There was nothing left to say. The strategy had done its work, not through revenge, but through alignment with reality. I had not destroyed her. I had simply stepped aside and allowed her decisions to face scrutiny without my protection. The irony is simple. She laughed because she believed I had no leverage. She believed loyalty was weakness. She believed silence meant dependence. She was wrong on all three. I did not win by attacking. I won by choosing where my competence belonged. And once it was no longer shielding her, the structure she built revealed exactly what it was. After her removal, there was an expectation from some people that I would feel satisfaction, that I would celebrate quietly, or at least acknowledge that the balance had finally corrected itself. I didn't. What I felt was something far more controlled. Resolution. When power shifts back to process, emotions become unnecessary. The system had done what systems do when allowed to function without interference. It examined facts and adjusted accordingly. At the rival firm, my position became public only after everything settled. Even then, the announcement was restrained. No mention of her, no comparisons. Just my role, my background, and my responsibility. That restraint mattered. It signaled stability to the market and finality to the situation. People understood without being told. In corporate environments, silence often communicates more clearly than statements. Former colleagues reached out cautiously. Some apologized. Others asked how I had seen it coming. I gave them the same answer every time. I said I didn't predict the outcome. I observed the structure. When incentives reward speed and punish caution, errors are not accidents. They are scheduled. I had simply stopped absorbing the impact of those errors on her behalf. My divorce finalized not long after. Clean, efficient, no theatrics. The legal terms reflected reality, not resentment. Assets were divided according to contribution and record, not narrative. She did not contest it aggressively. I believe by then she understood that confrontation only accelerates loss. Silence, again, was the wiser move. Looking back, the laughter in that boardroom stands out as the defining moment. Not because it hurt, but because it revealed intent. Public humiliation is not accidental. It is a declaration. She wanted the room to understand hierarchy. She just underestimated how hierarchy collapses when competence changes sides. I returned to doing what I do best: structuring, evaluating, advising. I worked on acquisitions that valued compliance over bravado, on leadership teams that welcomed dissent instead of punishing it. The contrast was immediate. Progress was slower, but durable. There were no emergency meetings, no whispered corrections, no need for intimidation to maintain order. Occasionally I hear updates about her career, new ventures, advisory roles, nothing central, nothing permanent. Power, once lost publicly, rarely returns in the same form. I do not follow closely. What matters to me is not where she ended up, but where I chose to stand. The lesson here is not about revenge. It is about leverage. Leverage is not volume. It is position. I did not raise my voice. I did not make threats. I moved my competence to a place where it was respected and allowed reality to do the rest. That is not dramatic. It is effective. People often believe loyalty guarantees security. It does not. Only alignment does. When loyalty demands silence in the face of risk, it becomes liability. I had confused endurance with strength. Strength, I learned, is knowing when your presence is enabling failure. If you ever find yourself laughed at in a room where you have earned respect, do not react immediately. Observe. That laughter is information. It tells you how others see you and how they believe you will respond. Use that information. Do not waste it on emotion. I was laughed at because she believed I needed her position. She was wrong. Positions are temporary. Competence is portable. The moment I carried mine elsewhere, the imbalance corrected itself. The strategy was never about her rival. That was just the destination. The strategy was about removing myself from a structure that depended on my silence to survive. Once removed, everything else followed naturally. In the end, the justice was not loud. It did not require confrontation. It arrived through consequence. The same public space where she once laughed eventually recorded her removal with the same neutrality it had shown my humiliation. That symmetry was not planned. It was inevitable. I did not need an apology. I did not need acknowledgement. The outcome spoke clearly enough, and that is how real closure works. When I think about how it all ended, I understand now that the real turning point was not the moment she laughed, nor the day I resigned, nor even the day she was removed. The real turning point was the moment I stopped trying to be understood by someone who benefited from misunderstanding me. That decision changed the direction of everything that followed. I had spent years believing that patience would eventually be recognized, that loyalty would translate into respect. What I learned is that patience without boundaries becomes permission. Permission for others to minimize you, to redirect credit, to rewrite reality in ways that suit their position. The laughter in that boardroom was not just disrespect, it was a test of whether I would accept the role she had assigned me. I failed that test in the best possible way. Silence, when chosen deliberately, is not weakness, it is preparation. While others expected reaction, I focused on structure. I focused on where my skills were valued and where they were being exploited. Once I understood that distinction, the path forward became clear. I didn't need to fight the system. I needed to stop protecting it. What followed was not chaos, but order. When competence moves to an environment that rewards it, results follow naturally. The rival firm did not succeed because they attacked aggressively. They succeeded because they were patient enough to let facts surface. In contrast, her leadership relied on pressure and speed. That difference eventually defined the outcome. There is a misconception that justice requires confrontation. It doesn't. Confrontation satisfies emotion, not resolution. Real justice is procedural. It unfolds through documentation, accountability, and time. It does not announce itself. It simply arrives when defenses run out. I do not carry resentment toward her. Resentment keeps you tied to the past. What I carry is clarity. Clarity about my own value, about the cost of staying silent too long, and about the importance of choosing environments that align with how you operate. No position is worth your self-respect. No relationship is worth erasing your voice. If there is something worth taking from this, it is this. Pay attention to how people respond when you ask for fairness. Laughter, dismissal, and public humiliation are not leadership tools. They are warning signs. When you see them clearly, you are already ahead. I was humiliated publicly, but I regained control privately. I was underestimated, but I was never unprepared. The strategy worked not because it was aggressive, but because it was inevitable once the conditions were set. When you remove your support from an unstable structure, gravity does the rest. Today, my life is quieter, more precise. I work with people who understand that authority is earned daily, not enforced through fear. I do not miss the noise, the tension, or the performance. I value clarity more than recognition. The laughter that once echoed in that boardroom no longer matters. What matters is that it revealed exactly what I needed to see. And once I saw it, I moved accordingly.